Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, can you walk me through the process of what happens when a state medical fraud unit identifies a provider that's committing a fraud within the system?
Broadly speaking, I can. I will sort of tell you the steps that I know, but I'll just make the point that MFUCUs, the Medicaid Fraud Control Units, actually respond to the Office of Inspector General, and they work with program integrity units at the state Medicaid agency. But surmising that the relationship is really similar to what we have with our Office of Inspector General, we will often initiate investigations based on data assets, beneficiary complaints, a host of other inputs. And then if there's any indication of fraud or patient safety issues, we will send that over to the OIG, and oftentimes state Medicaid agencies have similar policies engaging their fraud control unit.
Can the state medical or Medicaid fraud units indict providers?
I believe they can, working with the regional DOJ offices.
With our communication with our Oklahoma fraud unit for Medicaid, they indicated that they couldn't. They had to basically turn it over to you all.
Again, they might be referring to federal law enforcement, either, again, OIG or DOJ. As an administrative agency, we don't indict providers. We have various administrative authorities and actions, but the most severe is kicking somebody out of the program.
So they can go in and be fraudulent and billing Medicaid for millions of dollars, and the worst thing that happens to them, they get kicked out of the program.
Well, again, we have the administrative authorities that we have. We are able to suspend payments, terminate the enrollment of providers. And then I think, to the point that was made earlier, we do work with law enforcement to bring other, more criminal justice activities.
But we hear reports over and over again about providers that were kicked out of the program for having fraudulent claims, and then they turn back around, change their name, and they're back in business the following week. So what's the indicator that you communicate with the federal prosecutors and say, look, we want this guy to go to jail?
Right.
Or do you guys just don't do that? You say, well, whatever. You guys, he defrauded or she defrauded the taxpayers millions of dollars, but it's up to you.
Well, specifically with working with law enforcement, we make referrals, I think hundreds if not thousands of referrals, and we can actually get you some numbers for the last couple of years to show you how many, to law enforcement for those cases that are most concerning for fraud and where we believe a law enforcement action would be appropriate, at least from our determination. But I think to your larger question about providers kind of reinventing themselves, we too have noted that as a vulnerability and in fact have promulgated rules that have allowed us to close it by, for example, tracking administrative actions and actually applying them to owners who would try to reinvent companies.
Well, it seems like to me if more went to jail, that might prohibit them from going through. So do we know how many actually end up in doing jail time?
I think that's a question for at least the OIG or the state law enforcement officials.
Is that a number that you guys could provide?
We don't track. Remember, our authorities don't involve.
So there's a breakdown in communication, is what I'm saying.
No,
well,
no,
there
I wouldn't
has to
say
be,
that,
because you kick them out of the program, then turn it over, and then no one pays attention to them anymore. And if the federal prosecutors aren't willing to prosecute, then they come right back into your system. No one's paying attention to them, and they end up doing the same thing over again. Because if the worst thing that happens to them is they get kicked out, then it's not there. Maybe it might be something that we might want to look at. Maybe we ought to let the states do this. If they have a unit that specifically identifies claims to Medicaid that the state is issuing, and they see fraudulent activities, and they turn it over to you, you all kick them out, they turn it over, you all turn it to the federal prosecutors, they end up getting lost in the chain. Why don't we simplify the process and just let the state prosecute them?
Well, just to be clear, states don't have to go through CMS in order to get to prosecutors or law enforcement. They do have Medicaid fraud control units that they can go to directly.
But they
have other avenues that they
prosecute them, though.
Right, as administrative agencies, the state Medicaid agency, CMS, we don't prosecute directly, but we
Okay.
do work with law enforcement to do that. I wouldn't characterize it as a communication breakdown. I'd characterize it as different lines of authority. We are happy to work with law enforcement. We provide law enforcement with data on a routine basis, work with them sometimes for years as they develop, investigate, and take action on cases.
So do you think there's a better way, quickly, because I ran out of time here, is there a better way to handle this then?
I think it depends on what the this is that you're trying to improve.
Well, to prosecute the individuals rather than just kicking them out of the program and not actually sending them to prison.
Yeah. I think
Is
there's a
there-
balance. So it's really important, I think, to engage in prevention because prosecution takes, understandably, time. And what we don't want is folks billing programs that shouldn't be billing programs. And so it is useful to actually kick them out of the program and stop dollars from going out the door. At the same time, if we can work with our law enforcement colleagues to get the prosecution, we can have the deterrence effect and other impact that we want.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. You're